everyone. I just want to say welcome to all of the parents, guardians, educators, healthcare providers, family members, anyone who loves a child with asthma who has made it here to be with us tonight. My name is Kate. I work for the Lung Health Foundation, and I'm here with my teammate, Chris. Now, if you've ever called our free lung health line, you may have spoken with Chris. He's one of the certified respiratory educators here at the Lung Health Foundation who help people navigate issues like asthma, COPD, and in the last few months, he helps a lot of people understand COVID-19 and how we can protect ourselves, especially as people who are living with or affected by lung disease. We are, at the Lung Health Foundation, we are very interested in ending gaps in the prevention, diagnosis, and care of lung disease. And back to school season across Canada in the age of COVID-19 has exposed a lot of gaps or potential gaps. And it's got people thinking even more about what they can do to keep their lung health conditions under control. It is truly more important than ever that we keep kids out of hospital, that we keep kids' symptoms controlled. And I'll let Chris get into some of the reasons why in a typical year, we would see more asthma attacks in September. So we've got a lot to unpack. We've got a lot to learn. I just want to welcome everyone and say thank you. I'm going to be putting some pertinent links in the chat box of this session. And for those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, I'm going to be looking for your questions too. I'm going to be acting as a bit of a moderator. Feel free to add your questions either in the Q&A if you're joining us from Zoom or in the comment section if you're joining us from home on Facebook. I'm going to hand it over to Chris Haramy now. Chris, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. So this evening, I'm going to take you through some key points about going back to school with asthma, and going to be covering first some of the basics about asthma just to get everybody up to speed on how it's managed and just the basics of what it is. Go through the action plan. That's a very important tool that can help anybody who's got asthma, but especially at this time of year. Going to discuss what it means to have well-controlled asthma, because the reality is that most people do not have their asthma under control. And that's key at any time of the year, but especially through this pandemic, because the better it's under control, the less likely you'll have an asthma flare-up. And then I'm going to move on to some key points about Ryan's Law. So this is a relatively new from 2015 law that is helping to ensure Ontarians have asthma-friendly schools. And then moving on to what Kate had alluded to, the September spike. So the annual unfortunate increase in asthma exacerbations or flare-ups that occur usually around the third week in September every year. And then getting into the heart of the matter here, we're going to be going into topic of asthma safe learning. So really things that are going to be helping you when back to school comes around very shortly, some tips that can help. And then I'm going to open up to some questions. So first off, asthma basics. So what is asthma? It's a lung condition, of course. It affects the airways in the lungs, which are the tubes that bring air in and out of the lungs. Very important function. It brings in oxygen and removes the waste CO2. So you see on the left side, we've got well-controlled asthma airway. The airway opening is very large. You get a lot of air through, in and out, no problem. When you have uncontrolled asthma, when it's not managed well, or when you're having a flare-up, there are a few things that can occur. So first, you can get a lot of swelling of the lining of the airway. So you can see the opening of the airway when it's swollen gets much smaller. There can be an increase in mucus for some people with asthma, further blocking the flow of air and leading to symptoms like coughing and so on. And there can also be something called bronchoconstriction. So broncho meaning airway and constriction meaning tightening. You have tiny bands of muscles that surround the airways, and these can tighten up when exposed to triggers like cold air, smoke, viral infections, etc. So all these three things can make it difficult to breathe. So that's why we have some medications to help that. That's part of the strategy. Part of the strategy is to also avoid the things that cause this inflammation, so your triggers, which we'll get into a bit more. So reliever inhalers are the ones that are very important for quick relief of the symptoms of asthma. So they're usually a blue puffer, most commonly known probably through the history of asthma treatments would be Ventolin or salbutamol. And they're usually only taken as needed for when you have symptoms, and very important to have access to that quickly, and at any point in time you may need it. It's difficult to predict, especially with a child, when they're going to be needing it, so it's important they have access to that at all times. Depending on your age, they might be able to carry it themselves, but in other situations might have to have other accommodations. They should not be shared since they are medications. And then we have the other type of medications, the controllers, sometimes called preventers. So these are the types of medications that are very good at long-term control of asthma. They are very good at reducing that inflammation I showed you earlier. And they're taken usually every single day, sometimes twice a day, usually morning and at night. So you generally wouldn't see them at school unless, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, where we have overnight activities, field trips, etc. that in that case, you may see them at school. And occasionally some children might be taking it throughout the day as well as their morning and evening doses. So moving on to the action plan. The Asthma Action Plan is an excellent tool. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have it. They should. It's a very good tool that could be used by anybody who has asthma. Of course, if a child's too young, it would be the parent or guardian who would be managing this action plan and working with the physician or nurse practitioner to ensure it's understood and filled out properly. So it's usually based on the traffic light system, so green, yellow, and red, where the green zone indicates very well-controlled asthma. So you wouldn't have regular symptoms, you wouldn't need your reliever puffer, the blue one. You would be having it well managed without having difficulty sleeping, no problems exercising, and if those symptoms start increasing, like you're having symptoms on more than, say, 3 times per week, or needing your blue puffer more than 3 times per week, then you'd be considered in the yellow zone, in which case, if you have an action plan, it could allow you to proactively take steps to get the asthma back under control so it's back in the green zone. And if it's in the red zone, in which case you're having more serious symptoms, that's a situation where you would take your reliever puffer, perhaps every 15 to 20 minutes on the way to emergency department and get there as quickly as possible. So this is an excellent tool that we have available at the Lung Health Foundation, and everybody who has asthma should have one. The reality is most people don't, so ask your physician or nurse practitioner to fill one out with you. So here are some key questions we've used over years and probably even decades to determine whether someone's asthma is under control. As I said, most people do not have their asthma under control. Some studies show maybe only half the people who have asthma actually have it under control. So you ask these questions, these 5 key questions. Does your child need to use their reliever inhaler more than 3 times per week? Do they have symptoms more than 3 days per week? Do they have any nighttime symptoms on one night or week or more? They wake them up or affect their sleep. Has your child missed school because of asthma or social activities? Have they had any flare-ups? So if you answer yes to any of these, it's a good chance that the asthma is not under control. So that would be a good time to visit your healthcare provider to work on a solution so that it comes back under control. Okay, so Ryan's Law, this was a law passed in Ontario in 2015. It outlines the responsibility of the school boards and schools to keep a safe environment for children with asthma. including the fact now that students are allowed to carry their own reliever inhaler with them with their parental approval. It was a law named after the unfortunate incident where Ryan Gibbons had died after having an asthma attack in school. So it's not common that someone dies from asthma, but it still happens. There's still a couple hundred every year dying from asthma. So it's important, this law, and it helps to protect people with asthma at the school. Included in this Ryan's Law and asthma-friendly schools, the Ministry of Education provides this asthma plan of care. It's a 4-page document that can be filled out by the parent with the healthcare professionals' assistance, and working with the school and principal to fill out this form so that all the teachers and staff at the school understand your child's asthma, where their emergency contacts are, what triggers their symptoms, what medications they take, what indicates that they're having an emergency, where their medications are kept, whether it's on the person or somewhere else with the teacher. So this is an important form that should be filled out every year, annually, at this time of year. Your school may have a different form, as long as it's in line with this. It's important to track all children at school who have asthma. So we have a poster as well at the Lung Health Foundation. It's the asthma attack poster or asthma flare-up poster. You can order this. It's a great thing to have at schools, in your home, community centers. It outlines the steps to take when someone's starting to have symptoms, what action to take, what to look for, and what sort of symptoms you'd look for that indicates it's an emergency. Not always easy to figure that out, but it guides you in that manner. And then what steps to take if someone does have an asthma attack. So you can order that from the Lung Health Foundation. So the September spike, in a typical year, we don't know what's going to happen this year because it's not a typical year. Returning to school can mean an increase in emergency visits for children due to asthma flare-ups or exacerbations, also called the September spike. Main reasons, there are many reasons, but these are the main ones that are considered to be the likely reasons why this is occurring. So one of them is that during the summer months, where we don't have our usual routines, perhaps the asthma management plan hasn't been followed as well as it could be, and that can lead to poor control at this time of year and in the fall. And adding on to that, we've got extra triggers that can lead to the asthma attacks, like respiratory viruses coming out, allergens like ragweed, molds, cold air will start to be a factor, and other various triggers. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We've seen in Australia, for example, there has been a decrease in some asthma flare-ups in certain age groups, likely due to the fact that we're taking more measures to prevent exposure to the coronavirus, but that may also be helping reduce asthma flare-ups. We're not sure if that's going to happen here, but we're hoping that will be the case. So, asthma-safe learning. Here are a bunch of key points that can help keep your child safe when at school. So number one, social distance or physical distance, not always easy to do. Generally, the 2 meters is what we hear, or 6 feet. In some centers, and for example, World Health, they think they're a little more realistic sometimes. They say 1 meter, or that would be more like 3 feet. But the reality is, the greater the distance, the better. But you know, it has to be within reason, and we're not exactly sure how that's going to work in schools, but we're hoping it's going to be reasonably effective. Not one step is going to be the only step. All of them in combination will be helpful, and it's important to do as much as we can. So wearing a face mask, it's very important. It's been shown, research has been showing that it is effective at reducing the spread of the virus. Not so much at protecting the person wearing it, but everybody else around you is protected, and if everybody else is around you is protected, so are you. Then we've got respiratory hygiene. So ideally, when you're going to sneeze or cough, that you can sneeze or cough into a tissue and then throw it out and wash your hands. If not, you can sneeze into your elbow or sleeve. That's another good alternative. Again, wash your hands afterwards. So it's an important thing because we found that these droplets coming from speaking and talking, and breathing and sneezing and coughing produce a lot of droplets, especially coughing and sneezing. They produce hundreds of thousands of little droplets that could be exposing someone to the coronavirus. So masks, it's good to cover masks because it's a very common question, what to use, how to use it, etc. It's foreign to us, at least mostly until March this year. It's been a foreign concept to wear a mask, generally speaking. They're not a replacement for social distancing, hand washing, and proper ventilation, for example, all the other steps that are important. They are one of the steps, one of the key steps, but not a replacement for that. So when you're wearing a mask, you shouldn't feel extra comfortable to get close to people. Don't touch the mask, except the ear loops. For example, here's one we've been given by the Lung Health Foundation. So just grab the loops, put it behind your ears, and take it off the same way. Ideally, wash your hands before and after handling the mask. If you can't wash your hands, then use a hand sanitizer. If the mask becomes damp or dirty, it should be replaced. When not using a mask, store it in a clean, resealable bag or whatever works well for you, as long as it's not being exposed and other people aren't touching it, and it's not coming into contact with something that could be infected. Children should have spare masks. Anybody should, but I imagine, depending on the age group, a lot of masks are going to be falling on the floor, or being shared, or being touched by other people, or a whole slew of things are going to be happening. So it's probably a good idea to have spare masks around. And at this point, there is no data showing that people with lung conditions, such as asthma, cannot wear a mask. So it's one of those situations where there's probably not enough data yet. And maybe in the future, we'll have more data to help guide us in determining who should or shouldn't be wearing a mask. But the reality is, at this point in time, there's no evidence showing that it's going to lead to worsening asthma symptoms.
Chris?
Yes?
Are there guidelines on what kind of mask is recommended, particularly for children? It's one of the questions that's come in from, I believe, Christine. So is there guidance on what type of mask?
Yeah, I mean, it's not supposed to be used for children under 2, first of all. The mask should be, and I think I cover this well, there's a few things here.
Beautiful.
In fact, it's a good question because this poster sort of highlights some of that. So it should be made at least with 2 layers of woven fabric. And then I'll get into more details of that later about the actual design of the layers. It should be, with anybody, children or adults, anybody, fitting tightly, reasonably tightly, so that there's not much of a gap, not too much air, because if there's a big gap between you and the mask, you're going to be breathing out CO2 and breathing in a little bit of that afterwards. So you don't want too much of a gap. And it shouldn't require adjusting. Having said that, when I was first using these, some of them don't fit as well. So you have to find ones that fit well with you, otherwise you end up touching it all the time. They should maintain their shape after washing and drying, and should be able to cover the nose and mouth well and go underneath the chin. So hand washing, a very important part. As I said, it's not just one thing. It's not just masks. It's not social distancing. Everything is very important. And if we do all these things, it's going to make a big difference, I believe, for everybody. And it's showing that, actually, results of that, that we're actually able to contain this reasonably well, as long as everybody follows these rules reasonably well. So washing your hands and sanitizing if you don't have running water in a sink. You should be doing this before and after handling your mask. And when you enter and exit school, they're going to be having these stations in place to sanitize your hands. After you cough or sneeze, when you're being in public, touching door handles, handrails, etc., anything like that, you should wash your hands. before and after using the washroom, before and after preparing food, and before eating. And if you actually see your hands are physically dirty, that's a great time to wash your hands as well.
And parents, hot tip, if you're looking for a way to do that 20-second wash, about the time it takes you to sing ABCs. So if your kid knows their ABCs, they can properly wash their hands.
Excellent. Okay, so, and another key point here is that if anybody has minor symptoms, any students, children, adults, anybody really, that you might suspect could be COVID related, it's not easy to determine, I know. The types of symptoms that you could be looking for are multitude of them, and it's not always easy to figure out whether a headache you sometimes randomly have anyway could be related to COVID. So to use your judgment on that, but very often the most common symptoms would be a cough or an unusual cough. Some people have a regular cough if they have a lung condition already, but unusual cough, headache, mild fever. So that's a good time to stay at home, self-isolate, and follow the self-assessment measures and protocols from the public health department if it does turn out that you should be assessed for COVID-19. A very important part at any time of the year for asthma is to control your triggers. So reduce your exposure to your triggers. Some are very easy to do, some not so easy. For example, pollen, that's comes anytime from March till the first frost. And right now it would be potentially weeds, ragweed, goldenrod, etc. that would be in the air, especially on dry, sunny, windy days. Cleaning products. So as you can anticipate, likely you're going to be exposed to a lot more cleaning products. And for people who have asthma, that could be a key trigger for them. So at this time of year, especially trying to reduce exposure to your triggers, whatever they may be. Some people have allergens that affect them, and some people do not. So myself, I've got asthma, and allergies are some of my key triggers, like cats and pollen. So those are the ones I'd focus on, but also the irritants like cleaning products, smoke, etc. So it's important to know your action plan. I went over that, to know how to use it, what steps to take based on how you're feeling. Of course, any time of the year, anybody who's sick with a cold or flu, it's important to avoid them. Not always easy to do, but depending on the household, but as much as possible. The annual flu shot, that should be coming around in a month and a half or so. It's very important to get that this year, especially. We don't know what's going to be happening with if someone gets the flu. It's not going to protect anybody getting the flu from the coronavirus. So it'd be a great step to take for anybody. And generally it's available and approved for people 6 months of age and older, except for a few exceptions. And every school is going to have different policies. So it's important to know your school's policy. We have policies from the provincial governments, we have policies from the public health departments, and then each school board will have specific policies. So it's important to follow those as well. And consult with your healthcare provider. They're available, and find out their advice about your child's asthma. For example, should your child be attending in person? So there might be some advice from your healthcare provider would be helpful there. Make sure there's good medications available, like your reliever inhaler, and if you're using controller medications on a daily basis, make sure they're available, not expired, and enough to last a month or so. And then we have also part of our wonderful infographics, a backpack supply list. I love this. So a copy of your action plan. Thanks for showing. Reliever inhaler with a spacer device, if it's used with a spacer device, and generally meter dose inhalers that spray the aerosol out should be used with the spacer device. Cloth mask, and I would put an S beside that because, as I mentioned earlier, there's probably going to be some situations where they'll need to replace them, even normally if they don't drop them on the ground. Extra tissues, hand sanitizer to slow the spread of COVID-19. So here's a couple of key links that you can go to. Lunghealth.ca Back to School has a lot of information about asthma safe learning and teaching. The inhaler videos, great videos to look at to make sure you're using your inhaler properly. The reality is, as a good percentage of people, at least half, make at least one error when they're using their inhalers. So it's important that you know exactly how to use your inhaler, follow the steps every time until you're extremely comfortable with it. And then we have our toll-free number across Ontario and Canada. We've got 888-344-5864, and our email is available anywhere, info@lunghealth.ca, and our web address, lunghealth.ca. We also have an online chat from 8:30 to 4:30 Eastern time. So with that, I'll open up to any questions that people might have. Hopefully we have a few questions from the audience.
We've got so many questions, Chris.
Good.
So for those of you who are just joining us, Chris is one of the certified respiratory educators who staff our free lung health line. So if we do not get to your question this evening, we are open again tomorrow at 8:30. You can chat with us live at lunghealth.ca or give us a call. So with that, so Chris, the number one question that we've been getting, variations on parents or guardians who are concerned about their child being able to breathe with their mask all day if they have asthma. And then I have kind of an addendum to that. There's also a question about, is there any concern about, will educators be able to recognize if a student is having symptoms if they're wearing a mask?
Oh, that's a great questions.
Yeah, that second one was really, and just so you know, we are working on a very similar session to this for educators to try to fill in as many of those gaps as possible. But I'll let Chris answer those great questions.
Yeah, so I mean, with the mask on, that's a great point that it could be more challenging to see someone having challenges with their asthma, having symptoms in distress. So it would be great to teach your child that if you're having any problems with their breathing, to let somebody know, let an adult know, the teacher, principal, whoever else is around, and they don't have to wear the mask if they're having problems breathing. They should take it off and hopefully have quick access to their reliever inhaler. Whether or not someone's going to be able to wear their mask, that can, I'm sure, vary whether someone has a lung condition or not. How severe the condition is. Sometimes it's been recommended to have trial runs with the mask at home. I think a lot of children have been using masks anyway, but if they haven't, have them try it out, find a mask that's comfortable for them. And the reality is that some children with more severe asthma may not be able to go in person to school. We'll have to find alternatives or find exceptions because, well, I actually did a bit of research into the exceptions, and well, actually the first slide after here, I put some points here that does asthma exempt you from wearing a mask? First of all, I mean, it's got to be reasonable, and that's one of the words used in both of these. Ministry of Education said reasonable exceptions to the requirement to wear masks are expected to be put in place by schools and school boards. Staff or students with sensory or breathing difficulties may be exempted by the school principal, guided by school board policies. So there will be exemptions. In the TDSB, for example, I wanted to find an example right from a school board. All students will be required to wear a face mask or reusable cloth masks, which will be provided. Reasonable exceptions regarding the requirement to wear masks. Face coverings will be made, and students will have regular outdoor breaks for relief from mask wearing. So it really would depend. There's no hard, fast rule about that. It's not necessarily going to make cause any extra asthma symptoms for most people. If people have their asthma well controlled, it shouldn't be a problem wearing a mask, but that's going to vary a lot. And sometimes it's really just the claustrophobic feeling. Add that on to the anxiety you can get from having asthma. I know all about that. So it's common to have extra anxiety when you have asthma. So adding on this extra layer onto your face might be problematic for some people. So there may need to be exemptions and alternative ways to learn.
Chris, it definitely was an issue for me at first. So I have asthma as well, and I found it took me a little bit of time to get used to it. I can now put my mask on and breathe very well. I did have to practice, and I have little ones as well, and we've been trying to practice with them kind of as much as possible around the house in a more comfortable environment. So I really think part of what we're trying to do with sessions like these is get you thinking about these things before back to school starts.
Yeah, and the reality is it's going to
possible.
be a learning curve for many people, schools, teachers, parents, children. I'm sure we can base some of the information on other school boards in other countries that already started school. There's great successes in different countries of going back to school and not having severe outbreaks of the coronavirus. So we'll have to wait and see, and I'm sure things will likely need to be adjusted over time. And that's the reality. It's in this situation, there's no precedence for this. So I think things will be changing over time, and but it is important to get people used to these ideas, washing hands, wearing the mask. And in some situations, I believe some of the schools are going to have cohorts. So there'll be one group in one classroom only, and they'll be able to take their masks off in the classroom. I don't know which schools boards are going to be allowing that, but they'll be not using it wearing it in the hallways, but taking it off when they're sitting down. So, and I think part of the rationale for that is that when they're sitting down, it'll be easier for the teacher and other staff to be monitoring it. So they're actually staying a meter or two apart at that point.
So it's very much going to depend on the school board. Unfortunately, we can't give answers on what is to be expected at your individual school. But our CREs are here through the lung helpline anytime you run into an issue or have extra questions, even after this web session. So I do hope you'll reach out to us as the issues come up. As Chris alluded to, these are kind of unprecedented times. So let us help you. Let us fill the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, switching gears a little bit, we've had a couple of really good questions about whether children should be using their inhalers, their puffers with a spacer device or a chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, how long should they be expected to use that? Until what age?
Well, it really varies with the children. So, for example, I have a sample here of my own spacer device with an MDI. So the MDIs are the kind you have to shake, and they spray out, medicine gets sprayed out as an aerosol. So the reality is, if you're using this kind of device, which really most people are when they're using a reliever inhaler, it sprays out the medicine fairly quickly. And to get the medicine deep in your lungs, it's much more useful to use one of these devices. So you would shake the canister, put it in the back here, spray it into there, and then breathe from this mouthpiece at this end. The research shows you get much better deposition of the medication. And what type of spacer device used would depend on the age. Young children would not be able to really take any of these kind of puffers on their own. So you would have one of these devices that have a mask at the end for the young children. As soon as they're old enough to use a mouthpiece and follow the instructions, then we switch to the mouthpiece one. And they can use that really at any age after that, the one with the mouthpiece. Usually it starts at about 4 or 5, 6, depending on the child, when they're able to follow those instructions. And adults use it, seniors use it, and at some age, some people will need to use, at an older age, use back to the mask because they're not able to maybe form a good seal with the mouth, for example.
And part of our back to school asthma protocol, we are recommending that everyone goes over their inhaler technique. As Chris said, many people are making mistakes they might not realize. I've just put in the chat box a link to our inhaler video section where we actually have videos showing you for a number of different devices and a number of different age groups, how to properly take your inhaler. And again, the lung health line is here anytime you need a little bit of a refresher on your technique as well. Okay, another question, Chris, switching gears again a little bit. Respiratory viruses. Now, in a typical school year going back to school, we'd probably be talking about the common cold. But this year, of course, everyone's mind is on COVID-19. So we had a bit of a question a little ways back with regards to our asthma control check. If a child's asthma tends to be triggered by viruses, is there any difference to how we would evaluate whether their asthma is under control? Are there any extra kind of precautions that a parent should be taking if they know that their child, their asthma tends to be very triggered by viruses?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common trigger for children, probably the most common trigger that leads to asthma attacks or exacerbations and ends up putting someone in a hospital, a child in the hospital, would be viral infections. So it would be the same precautions really for colds, SARS-CoV-2, the original SARS, all these things where you're doing the same things we talked about: hand washing, avoiding people who are ill, staying home if you're sick, getting the flu shot would be very important, and hopefully early next year there'll be a good vaccination, maybe even earlier, we're not sure, for the coronavirus that we're currently experiencing. So yeah, it's the same things that we're doing, and we're actually hoping that there'll be less of these viral infections floating around because of all these extra measures we're taking. So we're not sure if that's going to happen. But any of these measures, the hand sanitizers, are going to help. We don't want to, it's unfortunate we're making all our children really paranoid about infections, but it is going to help them not only against this pandemic virus, but also cold viruses, flu viruses. But really, other people around the person who has asthma should also get the flu shot. We get a herd immunity from that. The more people that get the flu vaccine, the less likely that someone who has a severe illness or could have severe complications like pneumonia from getting the flu, less likely they're going to get the flu. So it's not only protecting yourself, but you're also protecting your children, your family members, your grandparents, and your community as well.
Great. Another question about face shields, Chris. So are face shields, do they offer that same level of community protection as a mask? Would they be maybe an alternative for a student who is continually having trouble with their mask? I know that whether they're going to be a suitable substitute for a mask is going to depend on the school board, but just in general, can you comment on what role a face shield could play?
Yeah, well, so far, again, with a lot of this, it's evolving. So even the evidence about face masks is not the strongest evidence, but it's pretty good evidence. For face shields, it's less evidence, less strong evidence of the efficacy of it, but it is an option that it is being used, and it could definitely be another option for people who are not able to use face masks. I've seen it in the community, and it will block definitely some of the particles that people cough out. That's the main goal of this. So that they don't get sprayed into the air, into someone else's face, into their breathing area. So I anticipate that it could be a reasonable alternative, and it should be, I know there's some, definitely some guidance on how they should be designed. They should go right around the face and underneath the chin and so on. So that's got to be looked at. But other than that, it's just one of those many things of this with this pandemic that we're not too sure about. many different question marks out there that hopefully over time we'll have more guidance from research. But I think that would be considered a reasonable alternative for people who won't be able to wear masks, especially if they have to go into public and be closer than 2 meters to the next person.
Great. So another interesting question for someone whose child has asthma and they are concerned about particularly about COVID, but perhaps about other respiratory viruses. In getting ready for the school year, should they be giving their child their inhaler more often? Should they be, I think the exact term was, do we increase, do we step up the amount of medicine we're giving our child through the inhaler?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really would depend on how well it's under control and working with their healthcare provider. So if you can say with all those questions we went over that they don't have to use their reliever inhaler more than only 3 times a week. If you need it more than 3 times a week, that's uncontrolled asthma, and that's the blue puffer. If you have symptoms on more than 3 days a week, just milder symptoms, that's also an indication that it's not under control. If you can't do sports normally, like everybody else, that's an indication it's not under control. So it's not something we would say increase the dose of medications in order to anticipate this perhaps a increase in pandemic cases, but always looking at whether or not your child's asthma or your asthma is under control. And the reality is, as I said, most people do not have their asthma under control. They think they do, but they don't. And they're using their blue puffer way too often. And it's an indication that their asthma is not under control. So there's excellent medications that could be either started or an increase in the dose or adding on additional medications. The goal is to be able to generally lead a reasonably normal life when you have asthma. We have NHL athletes, Olympic athletes who have asthma, and they excel at their sports, of course, they have to, and because they have it under control. So there's no reason to go around with uncontrolled asthma these days. It does often take a commitment to medications and a commitment to avoiding triggers and whatever might be irritating the person's lungs. But the reality is that those medications are generally very safe. The benefits of taking the medications almost always far outweigh any of the potential side effects, because you can take the medications and have minor side effects like hoarse voice, but you will be able to lead a normal life, be able to exercise normally, and the hoarse voice generally goes away after you've started taking the medication for a while. So the reality is, it's got to be under control, the asthma at all times, and it's good to revisit those questions at all times to make sure that the person's asthma is under control.
So Chris, it really kind of makes a case for that importance of the asthma action plan that's kind of tailored to you, so that as a parent, you take some of the guesswork out of some of these questions, when to step up therapy, things like that. So you have this kind of written down. It's something that you fill out with your healthcare provider, and it kind of answers a lot of those questions. So you definitely recommend that anyone with asthma has an asthma action plan. And we do on our website have both a version for adults and a pediatric version for kids. Yeah,
definitely. It's very important because it not only tells you what medications you should be taking on a daily basis, which it could be a nice reminder. Controller medications like the inhaled steroids like Flovent, Pulmicort, etc., they don't work if you take them as needed. These are the kind of medications that need to be taken every single day, usually once or twice a day, depending on the medicine. And if you stop, it'll slowly come back to symptoms. So it's important that they're taken every day and you follow the action plan. And the good thing about this action plan is also that you can proactively start getting the asthma back under control if symptoms start going into the yellow zone, for example.
Okay. I've got a bit of a more specific question, but I think it's a great example, guys, of the kind of questions that a certified respiratory educator through the Lung Healthline can help you with. So Chris, one of our attendees' son had pneumonia and she was told that, or they were told that their son was more likely to get pneumonia again. And they're wondering, is there anything that they can be doing to prevent him from getting pneumonia again?
Well, definitely controlling asthma well would help reduce the risk of having flare-ups, which could be a risk factor for getting pneumonia. So that would be one thing. You could also get the flu shot, because the flu shot is one of the key ways to prevent getting pneumonia, because that's one of the main complications of the flu. It happens every year to every age group, mostly in older folks, but at any age. And also everybody around that person getting the flu shot. And keeping the asthma well controlled. And then there's a bunch of other things that can be very useful as well that are not specific to asthma, like, for example, getting regular exercise, eating healthy, regular sleep, etc.
Great. Switching gears a little bit again, Chris, I'm sorry, we've getting so many great questions from all over. So on our Asthma Safe Learning Protocol, you can download this at lunghealth.ca/back-to-school. We'll put a link in the chat box. One of the pieces of our back-to-school protocol is a little piece that says, should your child be sidelined from sports? And we're getting a couple of questions clarifying what exactly we mean by that. What do we mean that your child should be able to participate if their asthma is under control? So can you tell us a little bit about asthma control and exercise in children?
Yeah, so generally speaking, and this is very general, most people with asthma, if it's well controlled, should be able to exercise normally like everybody else. Now, there's certain things that might be discouraged, like scuba diving, because of this pressure changes that can occur, and if you're having an asthma attack underwater and the pressure changes, that could be very dangerous for your lungs. But in general, exercise should not be an issue for most people with asthma. Having said that, if someone has very severe asthma, they're likely going to have limitations regardless of how well they're managing their asthma. So if they're taking their medications properly, doing everything as well as they could, avoiding their triggers, perhaps reducing carpeting, not being exposed to pets that they're allergic to, etc., and they're still having symptoms and they're more severe, then they're going to have limitations. That's just the unfortunate reality. But for the vast majority of people, they should be able to exercise normally. Having said that, if someone is having symptoms one day or a certain time, they shouldn't be exercising that day. Asthma fluctuates. It's a normal pattern of asthma. It comes and goes. The symptoms increase and decrease, sometimes for unknown reasons. So if someone on a specific day is having symptoms, they should not be exercising. If someone starts exercising and starts having symptoms, they could take their blue puffer, have a seat, wait for a while, and if they're fine after 10, 15 minutes and have absolutely no symptoms, they can try and start again. But if the symptoms don't go away, they should not start the exercise again. And if this happens occasionally, that's fine. That's just a normal fluctuation in someone's asthma. But if it keeps happening regularly, well, that's a sign of uncontrolled asthma.
Okay. One of the medications that you mentioned earlier, Chris, is Flovent. And we have a question about, do we know what the long-term effect of Flovent is for children?
Yeah, generally it's a very safe medication, so it would be dose dependent. Most people would not suffer any major side effects. They might have a hoarse voice for a little bit occasionally, which can be helped by using one of the spacer devices, for example. If someone is on it long-term at high doses, there's a chance that their long-term height could be reduced by about 1 centimeter. So that's one of the side effects that can happen with higher doses of inhaled steroids taken for many years. The reality is that uncontrolled asthma has consequences and dangers, flare-ups, exacerbations, emergency department visits, and can reduce someone's quality of life. So anytime medication is prescribed for anybody, a healthcare professional will weigh the benefits with the risks. So it's always good to be on the lowest dose of medications that you can be on to keep it well controlled. But the reality is inhaled steroids have been used for decades and they're generally quite safe, but they do come with some potential side effects like that decrease in final adult height of about 1 centimeter has been shown in some children who have been on high doses for a long period of time. But overall, on the usual doses that are prescribed, it's generally quite safe. But you want to try and lower the dose to the lowest level needed on a daily basis to keep the asthma well managed. And
When you
that's
say
sometimes
you
tricky.
mean the healthcare provider, right, Chris? The healthcare provider will be taking that into account.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Thanks.
Perfect. It was a bit of a follow-up question. What would be considered a high dose of Flovent?
Well, it depends on the age range, but if they're young children, probably about 500 would be per day would be considered a high dose. But that wouldn't apply to every inhaler because they all have different strengths. So you'd have to ask your healthcare professional if you're on a different one than Flovent, but around 500, 400, depending on the age of the child. But it's usually kept to a mild to moderate dose, the doses of inhaled steroids. And if someone needs to be going on a higher dose, they might increase the Flovent, but they might also add on what's called a long-acting bronchodilator. And that's combined into one puffer called Advair, for example, which includes Flovent.
Okay, really great questions, everyone, and exactly the kind of thing that we can help you with and give you kind of more one-on-one guidance and help you understand through our lung health line. Again, it's 1-888-344-LUNG, or you can chat live from 8:30 to 4:30, Monday to Friday. So on that topic of inhalers, Chris, and on risk and on the importance of accessing medication. For those of you who don't know, Ryan's Law in 2015, now this is Ontario specific, but one of the outcomes of Ryan's Law was that children are allowed to carry their asthma inhaler with them with parental permission. And that was named after a young boy named Ryan who passed away at school because he could not access his reliever inhaler. Chris, when a parent is deciding whether or not to give that permission to their child, what kind of things should they be thinking about? Like, what are the considerations there? And how can they communicate with the child's teacher to let them know that the child has their inhaler and will be bringing it with them?
Yeah, that's great because it does help a lot if the parent communicates that with the teachers, principal, etc. So most children is around the age 7 are probably mature enough to carry their inhaler with them. It would depend on the child, but most children around 7 years of age would be able to decide when they need their blue puffer to carry it with them, know how to use it, etc. So, but it's good to teach them about that every year and every month or so, just to make sure they understand how to use it, when they should use it. So if they're under that age, then they should be providing it to the schools so that they have quick access to it, not locked up in some cupboard in the main administration center, but with the teacher, very quick access. But most children over 7, and they do need parental or guardian approval to carry their medications until the age of 16. After 16, then they're allowed to carry their asthma reliever inhalers and other medications with them.
So I think communication with your child about their asthma is another kind of theme that we're exploring through our Asthma Safe Learning Protocol. You can access that at lunghealth.ca/backtoschool. The kind of conversations we're suggesting that parents have with their children, with their learners, are things like, do you remember how to take your inhaler? It's a great opportunity to access some of those inhaler videos we were talking about. And asking your child things like, are you worried about experiencing asthma symptoms in front of other people, kind of in the age of COVID-19 when we're all very concerned about coughs and sneezes? do you need help explaining your asthma symptoms? Do you feel comfortable asking your teacher for help if you're having trouble breathing? So I do encourage everyone to look at some of those conversation starters as well. These are conversations that you can be having right now with your child that will help them feel a little bit more confident and prepared when they go back to school.
Yeah, in this form, the Prevalent Medical Condition Asthma Plan of Care form from the Minister of Education also has an area which indicates if the child needs help to use their inhaler, for example. So it's important to have that filled out.
Another question, do children who have virus-induced asthma usually grow out of it? How do you know when to try to wean them off of medications like Flovent?
Yeah, well, growing out of asthma, that's a tricky one. But when someone has allergies related to their asthma, they're less likely to outgrow it. But really, anybody can outgrow it at a certain age as the chest cage gets larger and they go into, say, they're age 9, 10, 11, the tweens, they might outgrow it. It really varies a lot. Sometimes they outgrow it for a while and it comes back as an adult. That can happen. So what was the other question? Was related to...
how do you know when to wean them off of their medication?
Right. Yeah. Well, again, it would be driven by symptoms and a good discussion with their healthcare provider. So if someone is not having any symptoms any longer, able to exercise normally, not waking up at night, no nocturnal symptoms from asthma, that's a great thing to bring up at any time, regardless, because asthma can fluctuate seasonally throughout the year. So if someone's having certain seasons where their symptoms are worse, they might need more medication then, or medication then, even just starting it. But certain seasons they might be fine and not actually need to use their inhalers then. So it's always good to think about it, not on a day-to-day basis, because we want to get away from the common practice of starting up controller medications like Flovent or Pulmicort and taking it for a few days and then thinking that their child or you as the person with asthma, for example, is feeling better, so they stop the medication. And then slowly the inflammation comes back in the airways and the asthma comes back and the symptoms come back. So it's more of a longer term decision. If the person's not been having symptoms for a couple of weeks, and it's a great thing to ask their healthcare provider if they can perhaps half the dose of the Flovent for a while and see how the child does. And then if they're on a low dose already, try without, see how they're doing. But that's a discussion definitely with the healthcare provider, not to do on your own. But it is a great thing to bring up anytime. Seasonally or over the years, because asthma does change and people do outgrow it.
Yeah, we did have a question kind of along those lines. My son has not been taking his inhaler on a day-to-day basis and it has been under control. Should I start him taking the orange inhaler? So that's your maintenance inhaler, Chris, I think. Should he be taking his orange inhaler twice daily now before school?
Not if, I mean, that's up to, you and your child and your child's healthcare provider, but not generally. It's if there are no symptoms, it wouldn't be necessary to prevent any symptoms from occurring. However, there are some situations where historically a child always has symptoms this time of year. They end up in the hospital or they end up having more severe symptoms. Then if a physician might look at that history and say, well, I think maybe every time this year we will start you on medication this time of year to help prevent that from occurring again, if it keeps happening every year. So, but other than that, no, just keep monitoring for symptoms. There shouldn't be any regular symptoms, and then no need for a change in the medications.
Yeah, another great reason I think, Chris, to have that action plan kind of written out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this next question is really interesting. Will putting a mask on after needing the rescue inhaler slow down the benefits of the medication?
So you've taken your reliever inhaler and then you put your mask on? No, there's no change in that. the medicines in your lungs, I wouldn't know if it would do anything except, if someone has challenges wearing a mask, and some people have stress-induced or anxiety-induced symptoms. So if that's the case with the mask being put on, but other than that, no, it wouldn't affect anything to do with the medication.
Okay. Another participant has been reading online that children taking puffers like Flovent, so steroids, weakens their immune system. And with COVID-19, obviously that's a big concern for everyone. So is there evidence that use of these steroids can weaken the immune system?
No, I mean, there's no evidence that there's a need to stop any asthma medications. The key is to keep asthma well managed, and that's been shown with numerous studies and papers from US, Canada, Europe, World Health. And the key message is to keep the asthma well controlled on the medications you're using. There's no increased risk of getting the coronavirus infection when you're using the medication. If you do get the infection, there's no evidence that the use of the medication would be harming you or leading to more serious symptoms of the COVID-19 infection. In fact, it'll probably protect you. So no, absolutely not. It's important to continue that. And it's definitely, if someone's on higher doses, there might be some minor effects on the immune system, but the benefits of taking the Flovent are so tremendous at keeping the airway open, reducing that inflammation, allowing someone to breathe, and reducing the risk of these flare-ups. That slight increase risk from the immune system side would be far outweighed by the tremendous benefits from the medication. Again, also keeping the medication dose as low as possible, daily dose, to keep it under control.
Great. Another kind of, this is a kind of COVID era specific question. It sounds like this question's coming from an educator who's joined us. So hello, welcome. They work at a high school, and several parents are concerned with their child with asthma being exposed to all of the chemicals being used for cleaning and the amount of hand sanitizer that's going to be used in school. I know cleaning products are definitely a bit of a trigger for me, so I share this concern. Is there anything that we can do, any way we can kind of ease their concerns about those cleaning products that will be used to make schools safer?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a challenge because the benefits of using the cleaning products are deemed to be pretty good for preventing the spread of this pandemic infection. So, but yeah, it's a challenge. There's no easy answer to that because the reality is it's not an unusual trigger for people with asthma, this kind of irritation. So important to have the asthma well managed. When you have well-managed asthma, you're less likely to be triggered by these kinds of irritants. But it's probably going to be some situations where, for example, there'll need to be alternative learning strategies for some individuals who are more affected by these cleaning products. You could work with the school and school board in finding cleaning products that are less harmful or less bothersome to some people, but there's not much science behind that. Definitely, there are many options out there that could be tried that work effectively against this virus and other viruses. So that might be the situation where it might be necessary to make some changes with that particular school if people are having problems with it. So there's no exact answer, unfortunately, on that one, but hopefully there will be some solutions if that does occur. And the more triggers we avoid, the less likely you'll be having symptoms from other triggers. So the more triggers you avoid on your day-to-day basis in your home, outside, and other triggers in the school, like these cleaning products and dust and so on, if you can reduce those, then maybe it'll be less likely to bother somebody. And then ventilation, but that's a challenge in Canada most years, most of the teaching year months, most of the year. So it's But if you can open windows, that helps.
Okay, so I'm sensing a bit of a theme with kind of keeping your asthma under control, arriving at school with well-controlled asthma, following the action plan. We're trying to kind of, would you say we're kind of setting people up for success as much as possible if they return to that school environment?
Yeah, and the reality is there'll be some situations where it's just, it's not going to work out, but hopefully that doesn't happen too often, and accommodations could be made. Perhaps, there could be strategies like when a room is cleaned, that it's ventilated afterwards and children are not in that room for a while before they go back in there, those kind of things. But I'm sure that will be challenging as well.
Okay, so again, if you are finding that your child is having a difficult time, please do call us. Let's see if we can give you some personal guidance. Our certified respiratory educators would be so glad to give any parents who are concerned a bit of advice and talk through. There's a lot of triggers, Chris, right? Triggers could be virtually anything, right?
Yeah, it's very individual too. So, if someone has allergies that affect their asthma, like myself, then it includes a whole set of other things like pets, dust mites, molds, pollen, pests, etc. If they don't have allergies, and actually most children do have allergies that affect their asthma, about 80% of them do. But if you're one of the children who has asthma but allergies don't affect you, then you'll be focusing on other things. But yeah, that's also a key part of managing asthma is avoiding your triggers. And that's one of the best ways to keep that inflammation down that occurs in your lungs.
And we do on our website, lunghealth.ca, we do in the asthma section have a list of a number of different triggers. A few of them might even surprise you. They surprised me. Okay, so I want to thank everyone who joined us. Thank you so much for your amazing questions. You've given us so much to think about with some of your questions. And I just wanted to let you know, if you asked a question that was not answered through the session, we will be publishing a little bit of an FAQs coming out of this session with some of those questions. And I do encourage you to call or live chat or email with our lung health line. Anytime you have any kind of questions about your asthma, your child's asthma, or any other lung condition. We thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you a back to school season that is full of learning and growth, and we want your child to be able to focus on learning and not on their asthma symptoms. So any way we can help, please do let us know. And thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Kate. That was wonderful.
Okay, have a great night, everyone.
Good night.